Today I have a wonderful guest, also a spiritual teacher, and as we know, we're going to speak about a former psychotherapist in a way, even though there is a license, I assume. Yeah, but um, the field of psychotherapy has very quickly become a limitation for her, in the same as it has become a limitation for me. We're going to speak about why there is a natural transition from psychotherapy to spiritual practice and how this transition actually looks like. So I'm glad to introduce the wonderful Abby Wynne. Yeah,
Yes, that's
I
right.
hope I pronounced that correctly.
Oh,
Wynne.
you're pretty wonderful too, Julian. Let's send out some wonderful vibes out to the people watching.
Okay. So
Yeah,
Abby,
I
yeah, would you like to give a little bit of an introduction, what your background is, and of course we all know like backgrounds and biographies is just appearance, just the illusion, but we give people a little bit of information so they can follow maybe our train of development, can come to a deeper understanding. Yes.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm in Ireland and I'm married with 4 children. And when my second baby was 3, now he's 19 now, well, he's 3 months old. I went back to work and my husband left his job to become a stay-at-home dad, which was very unusual during those times. So I had this urge to become a psychotherapist. The reason why I'm bringing in my family life is because it was a big sacrifice for me to go to work to support my family and to go to college and to put myself through college again. So I had already gone through college once. That's actually when I met my husband, when I was doing master's degree in science. So I have a science background. And then I went all the way around the world and came back and we got married and had babies, literally had babies. And I was working and I knew there was something more that I needed to learn more. And so I started a psychotherapy degree. Then I got pregnant with my third child. So you can imagine there was a lot of effort and time and money put into my degree. And by the time my fourth baby came, which is the last one, the only babies I'm having now are books. Um, I became qualified pretty much around the same time as my work contract ended. And it was as if I had reached the edge of the cliff and I had to go into private practice. And I had the qualifications, I had made my supervision, I had all the hours done, I had my certification. But I also had Reiki master. I also became very spiritual. And I also was doing training in shamanic practitioner. So when I started seeing clients, I found it very difficult to stay in my chair and not go deeper with the things that they were bringing up. Now, what's really interesting, Julian, is when I went through my own crisis in my 20s, I went to a counselor and I did 6 sessions with my counselor before he said to me, "There's nothing more I can do for you." So I thought that meant counseling couldn't help me. He didn't say, "I know another person who'd be good for you," or maybe we could look together at the register of psychotherapists and pick. No, he said no. So I ended up going on an exploration of anything other than psychotherapy and counseling. So I already had an idea that the psychotherapy part was for the psycho, the mind, the thought patterns, but not necessarily the connection to the emotions or the connection to the spiritual. And I was very quickly seeing in my clients that we could go round and round in circles with the mind, with the
Yes.
thoughts, but we're not getting to the core issue. You're not actually healing anything. Maybe you're repairing a broken gate on a fence or a fence to a field where you shouldn't be living in
Mm.
anyway, and it was very much like the putting the band-aid on it. And
Mm.
as I had been left in the lurch in my 20s, as my counselor said to me, "There's nothing more I can do for you." And actually, typically, a session with him would be we talk and talk and talk for the hour. He finds my trigger point, opens up a box that I had so carefully stored my emotional pain. It explodes out, and then he says, "Okay, that's it for today. We'll see you next week." So I would be leaving, and I would have a whole week where I would have to learn how to self-regulate my pain. So for people listening, when you self-regulating is about controlling and managing your own emotional, to appear normal, even if you're in great pain. And I'm seeing more and more, which is a separate issue, how parents are now just handing their children iPads and phones to regulate their emotions through the use of computer games or screens. They're not going to be able to do that. But I would manage to take everything that burst out of that box, organize it, sort it out, get some semblance of balance, and then I go back into a session and you do it all again. So I swore not only was I going to be a type of therapist that wouldn't do that to a person,
Well,
but
obviously there was a lack of integration. There was just a
hugely
finding of the shadow bits, and exposing of the shadow bits without compassionate integration or compassionate understanding of why the trigger was there, why the trauma was present in the first place. Yes.
I was reading a novel, I think it was about 3 years ago, where she went to a psychotherapist and the exact same thing happened to her. And I got so angry, I threw the book across the room.
Oh.
For me, it's such a lack of duty of care to bring your client to a point where they explode out all of these emotions, then just leave them to it. If you're going to go there with them, you go all the way. So I was thinking, well, how can I contain that? How could I be more of service to somebody? How could we get straight in there and do deeper work and actually do it instead of talk about doing it? So I worked as a psychotherapist then with my qualifications in my private practice for quite a long time, but it would reach a point where I would say, okay, I have something that we could try that's not strictly psychotherapy. Can we do it? So I would ask their permission. And so they would do it. And then they would come to me expecting me to do it. And then that's when I started to get very popular. Now, it's not that I'm a psychic medium and I can tell them that their dead dad is sitting beside them and we need to talk to him to clear things. I wouldn't do that. And I made a contract with Spirit because I was finding I was learning more about my clients through my intuition than I really wanted to know. So I said, I only want on a need to know basis for whatever it is that they want to work with. But as time goes on, it's 10 years now, and I think it was about 3 years ago, my renewal came around again. Do you want to renew your accreditation? And you have to do all these hours of learning of things that I wasn't finding interesting anymore. And you have to then go to the supervisor for a certain number of hours just to say that you're being looked after. And the supervisor, I outgrew them. I'm sure you can relate to this. So I wasn't going there for me anymore. I was going there to tick off a box to say that I had gone to somebody. And when my supervisor would meet me at the door, so excited about what have you been doing this month and give me all this juicy, I start to feel physically ill. It's like, first of all, it's not really your business, but I had to talk to her about something. So it was a huge relief to make the decision not to renew, but it was also very scary because I didn't know who I was then.
Well, sometimes you need, in our soul evolution, we need those leaps of faith, because as long as we hold on to something, a certain self-concept, for example, when we have an ego concept of I am the psychotherapist, but you're supposed to become, let's say, a spiritual healer or a spiritual intuitive, as long as you hold on to that concept, well, we first need to create a vacuum for the vacuum to be refilled again. And that's the leap of faith or the trust in the alchemical process that we're all going through. What really strikes me here, that, by the way, that's very wonderful. It is very, very rare that someone has that many children and is able to go through a profound spiritual process. Usually when I talk to people and to understand this, I come from a very, very ancient tradition where our only goal is to go into realization. And to go into realization takes such a focus, such a determination. If anybody who, let's say, is tied up in worldly things, they'll have a hard time. So it takes a tremendous inner, let's say, perseverance and determination to say, well, I expand in this way, despite me being responsible for 4 children, despite me being married. Yeah. And that's rare. It's really rare. Usually when I meet someone and they say they want to develop profound mystical insight, I would recommend don't be in a relationship. Yeah. meditate for a few years, do certain exercises, do shadow work, be highly disciplined. Don't, if even possible, don't engage sexually with people, because all of these things very quickly become a distraction. And our biological system is very easily captivated by worldly happenings when we try to redirect it towards God, which takes a different level of determination, so to speak, because in the beginning it's not exciting whatsoever.
Oh, yes.
It takes a while before it gets exciting, before the visions come, before the aberrations happen, before the visions of, let's say, teachers or high-level beings that could communicate with us actually appear. So that is very fascinating. But where you struck a chord with me is the obsession in the West with the mind. And let's say my approach to transcending psychotherapy went a little bit different than yours. The integration thing, the lack of integration, I noticed as well. But that wasn't the trigger point. The trigger point was for me a spiritual awakening that I didn't plan. It just struck me like lightning. And just later, when I started remembering lives of being a Zen teacher, I understood why it struck me like lightning, because Zen is the fast way. When it's properly practiced, at some point, you are struck by lightning, transcend mind and body. And when I stepped out of mind and body, very quickly it became apparent that psychotherapy, in most cases, especially if we speak about cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, I'm not speaking about the Jungian approach. There's something profoundly spiritual in the Jungian approach. Yeah? But when it comes to cognitive behavioral therapy, well, what is really happening? There are programs in the nervous system, conditions, and a cognitive behavioral therapist is a programmer. He's simply replacing, let's say, one system, one belief structure, or one form of conditioning with another that might be maybe a little bit more appropriate, a little bit more efficient. But what all these cognitive behavioral therapists were not ready for is when they started introducing mindfulness to people. And people, when they practice mindfulness, started having spiritual experiences because they started more and more stepping out of the mind. The Westerner, and especially the scientific Westerner, when they take something from the East, they try to make it fit their belief system. So many psychotherapists could not accept that mindfulness practice would lead to spiritual experience. It was just a tool to observe the mind in their perspective. But once we start observing the mind, we step out of the mind. So now we have, in a way, left cognitive behavioral therapy, because instead of being in the same dimension and trying to fix it and repair it on that level, and just trying to repair symptoms, as you said, we're just putting a band-aid on it by trying to replace belief structures. So the software is basically exchanged. Like, instead, we're stepping out. Now we're suddenly the administrator, and we're looking at the system from the outside. Now choice appears that was previously not there. And when we understand conditions, conditions are karma. So through mindfulness and presence, we step out of karma. And suddenly can break patterns of behavior. And when I start teaching my clients that, and I was like practicing psychotherapy roughly 7 years. Like when I started teaching my clients psychotherapy, meditation and mindfulness, what I realized, they got better twice as fast. Yeah, the healing was speeding up tremendously. And then at some point, their intuition would kick in. So they started receiving guidance about where to go in life. If we would have just messed with the mind, they would have not perceived this.
You know what I have discovered, though, that there's two very useful things that I take along with me from all that training and all that investment and all the money and all the hours is the ability to actually listen, which I find that many people who come to me now have not been to psychotherapy. They've been to other healers. So the other healers that they go to have not got training in counseling or psychotherapy, so they don't know how to listen, but they also don't necessarily know how to speak either, or how to phrase things in an open way, or how to make the client more person-centered experience. So I find that by able to hold the space with the counseling person-centered point of view, do the deep spiritual work in, let's say, with the energetic way that we work there. But then I do come back to the cognitive at some level in order to help them create a new pattern and framework to convince themselves that the work is done. Because this is the most human thing of all, is to say, okay, that session with Abby never happened and I still have this problem. Because the whole life has to change around this new frequency that they have from being healed or from healing this thing or from actually getting their head around the fact that this is healed. There's trouble with that. So the old stuck structural framework conditioning can be reworked and shifted using cognitive behavioral therapy. So it is still a good tool, but it isn't the only tool. You have to do the spiritual work as well. Am I making any sense here?
Yes, very much so. So in an interesting way, of course, if we speak about one of the main tools of cognitive behavioral therapy, if we speak about the philosopher Socrates, speak about the Socratic Dialogue, yeah, where we, through careful questioning, begin peeling the onion of the belief structure, whatever client we're dealing with. Usually a belief structure is let's say, a fearful construct that is very, very hardened and that is supposed to actually protect the trauma, shielded from outside exposure, so to speak. So when we start chipping away at a belief structure by asking certain questions that lead to a peeling of the onion or to an archaeology of self, so to speak, yeah. When we do this, what happens at some point that we start moving into the spiritual, because yes, first we deal with the obvious conditions that are in that way behavioral, but behind the behavior, of course, is a trauma. So we are trying to find out what is the compulsivity or the compulsion, what is it hiding, what is it protecting? And in that way, let's say when someone practices mindfulness, and of course we're going to go deeper than mindfulness, even in this conversation at some point. We're probably going to move into the topic of shadow work and what it actually means to retrieve, let's say, early childhood trauma or even past life trauma. But it is important to start chipping away at whatever belief structure there is. Now, most people are identified with their belief structure. So when they say they mean I am immersed in my belief structure. This is who I believe I am. If we ask them who they are, they give us a story. The story is not who they are.
Yes.
And in a way, the tools of behavioral therapy, they become more effective once you know the stories are not who they are. And once they understand that this is a story that they have created. But this is already leaving the realm of cognitive behavioral therapy. The tool still exists, and we are aware and conscious of using a tool. But we're doing it already from a dimension higher, where we're not arguing from the level of mind, which can very, very quickly, even for a psychotherapist, turn into a narcissistic endeavor. One needs to be very, very careful about. I met a few psychiatrists, for example, who would fit that type of bill, where suddenly everybody who came to them became a concept or a diagnosis or,
absolutely,
medical.
Yes.
So when we step out of the mind, then we can treat the mind. As long as we're in the mind, it's simply mind's looping within a box. Definitely. And this is often where people get frustrated in therapy, because they feel like, oh, I'm looping. Or the therapist doesn't have answers, because both are trapped in the box of mind. At least one needs to be already outside of the mind in order to assist the mind heal from a higher perspective. But then the tools are there, but they become an extension of spiritual intuition. Do you agree with that?
I do, actually. When you're speaking, I'm going back to, in my mind, to my pregnancies, which is interesting because you're talking about my children and how at an early stage I decided I will get through these pregnancies by being fully present in my body to them. So it was as if I was doing a yoga of coming into my feet and coming into my legs and being more than just in my head. Now, when you go through pregnancy, your body goes through so many changes and it can be awkward and difficult and painful. And so you tend to leave. And so you're in your head or out of your head. And I think most people in the world are living in their heads or out of their heads. slightly to the left or to the right of their head, which is part of the problem, because you don't feel like you are a whole being. You're not really accessing your heart when you're not in your body, you know,
Yes.
or you're not accessing your power. And I've really come to believe that our power is in our gut, and our gut instinct, the power of our will, when we're in alignment with the heart. All of these things, you know, the brain is just another asset, another resource. It's not the driver of the car. It has, you know, it could be a helpful navigator, but if it takes over, then you lose the run of yourself in such a way that you lose who you are to that extent. So I remember being in my body, traveling in and meeting my babies in there, which was really, really exciting and cool. And then the birth, we won't go into that. But that's the thing, you see, when you're in pain, it's too painful to be here. Do you want to be here? Do you want to be in your body when your body's in physical pain? I find when my body's in physical pain, I come into the body and I soothe it, because I find as a sensitive person, I do have fibromyalgia like symptoms. I've been in chronic pain for years, but I wouldn't say that I have fibromyalgia or I am in chronic pain, because I change in moment to moment. Whereas other people, then we go back to the psychology and the framework. I have this thing and I am this thing, and then their body just wants to be that, because it's like a child that just wants to please you. So when you see how complicated the human is, this is how I work. I spread out all the different aspects, and then you come at it from above, which is like the meta, you know, the meta code in a web page. It's not coming at it inside the head. It's looking down on the whole piece. And I think psychology doesn't do that. Psychology is all about integrating everything. It's not about opening everything up and discover, you know, and breaking it up and looking at different parts. So I always felt like a piece of, you know, a pack of cards and all the archetypal energies in each card. And in order to truly understand the whole, you have to open it all out and see all the pieces as well.
What
So
I find very important is one of the main things that we could describe as unconsciousness, which is actually dissociation.
mm.
And with most clients that I have, and I'm not spilling any secrets here by saying that most of humanity is traumatized. The majority. Yeah,
Well,
maybe
just being
80.
here can be traumatic enough.
Well, the human experience is quite challenging. I guess we can agree to that. And traumas appear when we don't have the tools to integrate our experience. Yeah, because then, of course, whatever experience we have, whatever pain we have, is in a way frozen in time. And our energy memorizes it. And with our nervous system, if we turn it inward instead of towards the world, we basically do the reverse engineering, or let's say the archaeology of self, where we peel the onion and go backwards and suddenly realize, oh, I have pains in my body. This pain is a messenger. It contains information that tells me why I experience here an energetic limitation, why I'm not fully expressing myself, why am I not fully authentic. And for the majority of people, when they don't have the tools yet to do this archaeology, because of course there are various forms of yoga, there are various forms of psychotherapy, shamanic methods, there are many mystical methods to get to it. But when they don't have the tools yet, the main thing that I'm seeing is that they dissociate from the body. So they lose body awareness and they're fully in the mind because they don't want to feel the pain. So they move into
Yes.
the intellect. And the difficulty is, yes, they can numb the pain to some degree, but at the same time, they lose complete contact with their guidance system, because you need to be aware of the body to use the nervous system in reverse. So for yogi, that's very direct. So when I sit down, I see my energies. I see the vortices spinning in my body. I can tune into them. I can move energy just by intention, and I can see the energy move. So I know that if I, for example, focus on different energy centers, different dimensions of my experience will open up, or different dimensions of what we could call ultimately God. Yeah, there are so many aspects to who we are, and the human aspects, when we reverse engineer, basically end up in divine aspects at some point. And then we realize, oh, the human is integrated into that. but the divinity is not integrated into the human in that way. It's more like the human exists within it. And we need to let go of our locality to realize the totality. But
I completely agree.
yeah. But interestingly, that leads through the body in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to become body conscious first, because whatever traumatic experience we have, we might feel it as a stabbing sensation in some part of the body, or as a sense of nausea. And the interesting thing is when I work with some clients and they describe to me a life situation, and they say, well, I cannot get out of the situation, then they give me a story. I very, very quickly often ignore the story, not to be unkind, but I know the story is fiction. And then I ask, where do you feel pain in the body? Yeah. And I assist them in shifting awareness back to the body. And then they feel, oh, there's something in my gut. Something hurts. Then I say, okay, give it full awareness. And now don't resist it. Like, breathe normally, sit upright, don't get in a fight or flight response so it can be processed, so you become aware of it. And then interestingly, what I often see on a psychic level, I see their childhood trauma or their past life trauma holographically, how it operates, right? So the overcoming of dissociation is key. So when you said in your pregnancy, oh, I'm going to live consciously in the body despite the pain. Yeah. So you didn't give up on communication despite a challenging, let's say, material experience.
No, definitely. And as we're talking, as people watching, the type of people who'd be drawn to the conversation that you and I would have can relate to the spreading of delusion around identity. And it's almost a deliberate, it's like they put a crowbar in and they're wedging you out of your body deliberately so that you create a story in your mind as to who you are. It doesn't match your body. So then you want to make your body look the way you think you are. So that's like, to me, it's extreme dissociation,
Yes.
and delusion, and unfortunately the people who are targeted are probably the brightest and strongest spiritually of all of us, and it's a distraction from how powerful they could be if they were to just accept the body and come in and live fully through their body as it was given to them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, because
this isn't what I intended to talk about, but I think it's
that's
connected.
fine. If it goes in that direction, it goes in that direction. Let me ride that horse. There was a time in my life where I got a lot into, I'm not gonna say conspiracy theories, but conspiracy facts. And I started researching because I felt that the Western system that I was growing up in was tremendously hostile, first in my subjective experience towards me. But this was the young man who then had a narcissistic perspective on himself. But when I started growing spiritually and started developing compassion, I simply noticed that the system was anti-human. Yeah, because a human is actually, in its true nature, when a human is fused with the soul, it is a divine being. That's why we say human being. Being is the soul, human is the experience. But being is completely removed from that equation in the Western society. And everything that could point you into being, well, you're constantly being referred back to the mind, to the story, to, let's say, the fake history that we have. Because many people, especially nowadays, I'm surprised, they start remembering their Atlantean origins, for example. So a lot of Atlantean past life memories going around at the time, where all these, let's say, difficulties that we experience, there are these old energies just in a new appearance, in a new suit of clothes, basically. And we're dealing with the old human, well, I wouldn't say mistakes. Ultimately, there are no mistakes in the universe, but with experience that we chose that weren't necessarily in alignment with the highest good at the time being. So growing up in the West, I realized actually when going to university and studying philosophy, I looked at those philosophers. They were completely impractical. They were so gone. They were so in the mind. I wondered if they could make breakfast and go to toilet and actually swipe their butt. Like I was like, You're so far gone, and life is a theory to you. I remember talking to a guy who believed everything was determined by social conditioning. It's like he told me, oh yeah, you can't behave in a different way because you're conditioned that way. And then I remembered one philosophy professor who said, well, if I'm conditioned that way, I'm going to leave this conversation because I'm conditioned this way. I don't have to stay here. Yeah, there is this tremendous idea in determinism, which is actually the narcissism of the mind. Because the mind wants nothing but to keep itself going, to perpetuate itself. And in fact, when the mind becomes separate from the higher mind, that means from our soul self or from our oversoul ultimately, when the mind becomes separate or acts as a separate agent, and usually I use the example, imagine your hand would have a brain and it would think it is an I and it would act separately from you. It would create tremendous chaos, right?
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, but that's what the mind does. The mind is like, I am an I exist, I'm a self, and I make so much noise that the higher forces that actually supersede me are not being recognized. So the soul stays in this container of amnesia. And the system feeds the amnesia in every way. I remember one time seeing a TED talk of Graham Hancock where he spoke about psychedelics. And he said, it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on consciousness. And that I found profound because all the technology, yeah, and I'm not using psychedelics in my own practice anymore. Like for years, I have not, because all these things happen naturally to me now, just through meditation, just through yoga.
I've never used anything. Never, ever, never wanted to.
All right.
Yeah.
So, but there is in the system a hostility towards everything that could undo amnesia. That doesn't fit the
theory for you, Julian. I have a theory here.
All right.
Because in my own work, the only way that I would help a person be at peace with a new configuration, let's say where the mind has been dominant, we pause the thoughts, we go in and reactivate the heart energetically or spiritually, and then empower the heart so that the mind and the heart are then equal players. That my sense is that the mind has been given permission to be the ruler over all of the parts of us, that society is created in order for the mind to like the story that it is the ruler of all of us. So when the heart rises up and becomes an equal player, I've spoken to people's minds as a separate aspect of themselves. I speak to my mind all the time. And once the mind know that you're not going to get rid of it, because, okay, you come from the background where it's all about kill the ego, get rid of the ego, be egoless. And I've never been that way. I've seen the ego as a structure that we need to navigate the world in this body. And then there's being egotistical, is when you think you are the all and end all of the life. That's when the narcissism can come in. But I've seen it as a very important part of who we are. So it's like I sit down with the brain and say, look, brain, I need you to not be the boss of me. You're very valuable. You're very important. Come along and be one of my many aspects of the whole of me. So we'll consult you. And then we move the way, whatever energetic flow is required. So I'm not mind driven. I'm not necessarily heart driven too. It's like equal balance. So I think the world that we live in has been constructed for a mind dominant society. And so that's the conditioning that people find very difficult to break. But when you can bring in the heart, most people are too afraid to show their hearts, because you get hurt when your heart is open. You get hurt when you're feeling what people are feeling. And then there's the empath type who are too open and they see too many things. So then they shut down too much and then they can't activate their hearts at all. That's the balance. It's out of balance.
Yeah, I need to reflect on that a little bit. I'm going within myself a little bit, because there's parts I deeply agree with you and there's parts I disagree. Where I deeply agree with is the mind dominance. Yeah. The emphasis on mind as the only referral of identity. And when you say, let's say, for example, that the Buddhist monks or the yogis try to get into a state of egolessness, in a way, I don't experience mind and heart being equal. I experience the mind being an extension of the heart. So in a way,
Yes.
what I experience is this. And I know for some that's a little bit far out, but when I meditate and sit, for example, with my spiritual teachers and I experience them speaking to me telepathically, they are in what we could call the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit has a certain logic. It's not logicless. It's full of love, but it is the logic of love. So it is reason, it is purpose, it is meaningful. And what I noticed in the beginning, when my psychic senses started developing and the isolation of mind starts slowly breaking down, that the mind has a fear of death, the mind has a fear of relinquishing control. But when the mind starts listening to the logic of spirit, what happens is that the mind is contemplating what spirit is saying, and then at every point comes to the conclusion, oh, what spirit is saying is perfect, it's superior than my logic. And then it relinquishes control.
Yes.
Piece by piece by piece, aspect by aspect. So I see the mind more like a glove that becomes an extension of the hand, that it
That's
doesn't have
amazing.
separate
I
will.
just saw the heart growing a hand, and the hand with an eye, maybe because you said it earlier, and that is the brain, because you can't
Yes.
do anything. You can't function in this reality unless you have the brain to, to work through all the limbs and the doing. Or would be human doings as opposed to human beings. When you're a human being, maybe the doing comes through you, as opposed to being the puppet and you're the master of the puppet and not really in your body, not having the experience.
Well, obviously, we cannot exist in a healthy way, in a conscious way, by being an enemy to the ego phenomenon, so to speak. Like if we're an enemy to it, we're reinforcing it.
Yes.
Because the
Yes.
very nature of the ego is fear. And it is separation and limitation. And it's saying, well, here's a fence. Within that fence is everything I call I, and everything outside is alien, and I feel xenophobia towards it. Right? So that's the narrative, that's the story, that's the own individual matrix that everybody has as a copy in their nervous system of the, let's say, totality of the matrix. But they have a little bit of an individualized, traumatized version of it.
Yes. Yeah,
Right?
that's fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So egolessness does not mean to go to war with the human experience. In fact, in my own experience, I've realized that every time I drop resistance to the human experience, I naturally shift into a higher state. So if I accept, for example, the conditions in my body, if I accept maybe that the mind is in some sort of conflict because it is afraid of something, and if I truly accept it, in a way you could say that is forgiveness. If I truly accept the conditions that I'm experiencing, then there is a shift into the timelessness, and then there is a superseding of mind and body. And in that moment, and this is what all human beings do, you also do that, even though you say you're not a medium. When your intuition kicks in and you start speaking from your intuition, you are channeling. Same way a painter, when they paint, they channel. A musician, when they write music, they channel. Everybody's channeling something. It's just the question of what dimension or level of reality are they channeling from. And the more we accept our conditions, the more we surrender to them and allow them to be what they are, interestingly, then they shift, then they change, and spirit begins entering the body. So when we become aware of our body again, we stop dissociating, we stop being exclusively in the mind and seeing everything through concepts. So we don't smell it anymore, we don't touch the world anymore, we don't taste the world, we don't feel the world. So there is a reduced perspective on reality by reducing everything to concept and the limited logic of the mind. The mind doesn't mean to be hostile. It doesn't want to be. It is trained that way. It is conditioned that way. So the mind can be an ally by becoming an extension of spirit. And in my experience, it actually becomes very, very joyful when it's being modified through certain practices, mystical practices, that it actually can tune into higher frequencies of spirit and then realizes, oh, I'm not separate. And every time I listen to spirit, actually my own conditions are improving. So it starts relinquishing its dominance.
Totally.
And that's what we could call at some point egolessness, because the mind is not separate, but it is an extension of spirit. And this is let's say, if you want, this is the rebirth
Like it's just a matter of semantics that we're not agreeing on. It's just the language, which I think is part of the issue, is people saying things in different ways, but they're saying the same thing. So no, I think, I do agree. And it's interesting as you're speaking. For me, it's like when you're out of your head and you're in your mind, you're not fully present, you're not fully here, but the mind is like the opening for you to come into yourself more. So when spirit fills you up, I'm beginning to feel lately that it's me that's filling up me. You go through the level of growth. You go through the level, and I'm calling on my angels and I'm calling on my power animals, and I was teaching a shamanic workshop about a year ago. Once I released myself from the psychotherapy, I realized there was a lot of chains that went with that. There was a whole duty of care that I suddenly did not have to adhere to. So I could say to people, you're showing up as a responsible adult. I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff. It's up to you what you do with it, and I'm not responsible. And it's difficult to say that when you're a psychotherapist, but you can say it when you're not one. So I found great freedom in that. So anyway, so we were going on a shamanic journey to find a power animal. And someone was saying, well, what's a power animal? So the way I explained it, I thought, oh, I listen to myself as I'm channeling myself and explaining what power animal is. I say to them, it's an aspect of you that's not currently integrated with yourself in the life that you're in. So by putting it into a form of an animal, the choice of animal it takes, let's say if it's a lion, its strength and power is something that your brain can relate to as the characteristics of the energy that you're lacking. And as this lion is out fighting for you, let's say you're going to go to an interview, the lion goes first and then you show up afterwards, and it slowly becomes where it walks with you, and then it steps into you and becomes part of you as part of the embodiment and integration process. That's how I understood power animals, which made a lot of sense to me. So then I started to wonder, well, what about angels? Is that me as well? What about these deities? Are they me as well? What about?
Now you're opening the Pandora's box. If we're gonna go there, we're gonna be here for the next 10 hours.
I say to you, who do you think God is? I mean, I think like the champagne glasses at a wedding, where it's the champagne pours into the first glass and it goes into the next one. That we're all connected in that way at some level. We're all part of that champagne coming out of the bottle, and depending on what level we're at, it's whether we're a glass at the lower level or at the third level up, or we can see each other closer. There's fewer of us aware at certain higher levels, and that's fine. But I just think that we're going through a huge awakening, and conversations like this is really important to have.
Oh, very much so. And what you just spoke about is, to me, not theoretical but experiential.
Yeah.
So it is impossible to put into words what realization is like when one experiences ego death. But I can explain it in terms of logic. It will not lead to, for the listener, it will not lead to an experience.
I think I kind of explain it in my novel. This is where I had a conundrum, Julian, because I've written my self-care books. This is how you look after yourself. This is how you get your power back. This is how. And I thought, well, I could write 50 more books. They'd all be the same. It's the same principles, just apply it to emotional eating. Same principles, just apply it to relationships. I get bored very quickly with that. I didn't want to do that. But then one of the things that we have already said is about the client getting stuck in this story. And this is the story of my life. This is the story of my trauma. This is what I'm going through. This is who I think I am. And I thought, well, I could write a story and teach through fiction. So I've written a trilogy where my main character is loosely based on me, some of her experiences I've had, but she goes through spiritual crisis. She goes through ego death. She goes through spiritual mystical experiences, and then she has to get up and go to work and sit in an office and answer the phone. And how do you make sense of all of that? So people who've read it have said they've seen themselves in it, or it's answered a lot of questions for them. And I just thought maybe for me at this stage of my career, my life, writing about mystical experiences, weaving them through fiction and making them in this reality can help a lot of people understand, like instead of saying this is the logic of what would happen, this is what it might feel like to you, then you experience it through a character who's experiencing it in a novel, and then you realize maybe that you've already experienced that yourself.
See,
It's
Amy,
interesting.
that is very wonderful, because when I was studying philosophy in university, I got very, very quickly fed up with something that philosophers struggled with. They wanted the acknowledgement from the hard sciences, all right? So they would bend over backwards to satisfy them, instead of, let's say, going back to the roots of philosophy. When you think about the early Greeks, for example, a lot of them were mystics, actually, and they had tremendous intuitions. And I said at some point, well, I can let go of the need for scientific proof. Let me start writing fiction too. And I was actually mostly writing dystopian science fiction, in a way, in the style of, for example, 1984, Brave New World, because I was, in a way, autobiography, in a way, in a form of autobiography, like hidden in the writing. What is my experience of the Western world, of the matrix that I was born in, and I would put it into more extremes by moving it into the future and just putting a stronger accent on certain things and making them more apparent. But so in that way, stories, also stories of awakening. We have stories of being unconscious. We can write stories of awakenings. But at the time, I wasn't spiritually aware, so I just did a diagnosis of society without the remedy, which I find not very satisfying when you have a very negative book that just analyzes how society is
You
completely.
working stuff out. You're working stuff out.
Yeah, I was at that time. So, but when you spoke about this pyramid of champagne glasses, and you asked the question, well, am I the angel? Am I the deity? Am I the God? Am I? Yes. And this is what I mean when I say, for me, that's experiential. It's not theoretical. What I often experience in meditation, like if we speak of it in terms of archetypes, for example, if we have the idea of Jungian archetypes, I usually speak of it also in the terms of the tree of life, that the tree of life is, for many people, is actually not understood. If we look at our nervous system, it branches out like a tree. It is the extension of consciousness into this dimension. But if we travel it backwards, we will realize, oh, they are higher dimensional nervous systems. They are portals within portals within portals. They are wormholes within wormholes within wormholes. So when I meditated, for example, on my energy centers, what I found out at some point, when really zooming in into the tiniest detail, that at the core of every energy center is a black hole. And I saw the same. This is basically the same thing that you would see at the center of a galaxy. There's an energy vortex. In that energy vortex is a black hole. Then the question is, are these different black holes? No, they aren't. It's just one and the same. It is basically that every vortex that brings energy into existence and then therefore creates an intelligent structure and a form to experience. Again, all of energy is Maya, is appearance, is illusion, ultimately. But when we travel back into this black hole, so to speak, we arrive at the I am, which is nothing but awareness. And it itself cannot be separated. You cannot fractalize it. Yeah. And at some point, we begin realizing, oh, everything is aware. A bee is aware of the flower. A flower is aware of the sunshine. They have different experiences. But the fact that they can observe experience is the quality of the creator, which is awareness. And then we begin to understand, and it's very interesting, the mind makes a claim to psychological content being its content, its identity. But for mediums who started moving away from the localized mind and enter more of a quantum field of experience, now they move into the higher mind, they suddenly hear their spiritual teachers' voices in their mind as if they hear their own mind's voice. So there is a border broken down. There's awareness watching it. So that's clearly something that is irreducible. You cannot remove it from any experience. So this is ultimately the void or the emptiness, what God is, what cannot be deducted from any experience. It's impossible. If you have a psychedelic experience, you are aware of it. If you have a dream, you are aware of it. If you have a body, you are aware of it. If you have a psychology, you are aware of it. So awareness is the one thing you can never remove. Huh?
Unless you're choosing deliberately not to be aware of it, which is what many people are doing.
Well, yes, but then at least there's an experience of mind, and you need to be aware of mind to some degree. It's just that the awareness is very, very dialed down, very much
it starts knocking on your door, and it knocks louder and louder and louder until you can't ignore it anymore.
Well, that's when the suffering comes, when all the symptoms come, when we stop ignoring that voice. And yet, so if we speak about the idea of archetypes, for example, when you spoke about power animals, at some point in my experience, first I was quite in love with Buddhism, and I built a little bit of spiritual ego around that. Oh, I'm a Buddhist teacher, I'm running around in a kimono, I'm teaching Zen. But I got stiff as a brick, I can tell you, super stiff. Yeah, and my teachers kept poking me and poking me about that. So interesting thing is, at some point I started experiencing Hindu deities. There was a total inconvenience, I can tell you, because now I can't remain a Buddhist. I actually have to expand. So, and what they started teaching me, that they were the archetypes within the psyche of God. That blew my mind. So,
I love that.
So imagine your own mind obviously has archetypes. If we speak about in Jungian terms, anima, animus, shadow aspects, and so on. Now, so our own soul psychology has many aspects, and especially if we would use our past lives and we basically merge them into each other in a holographic fashion, you would come out with a Hindu deity with 10 arms, 10 heads, and so on. So you would see all the aspects of yourselves. And then within the oversoul, you have these archetypes that you tune into, and also the collective ones. But then to realize that after the void, the complete emptiness that God is, comes the energy ocean. And then from that energy ocean, you have holographic experiences that are gods, and they take on different interfaces, depending on what culture they interact. One time, the deity Kali, she showed me that in Egypt, she was known as Isis, and in Greece, she was known as Athena. So she would put on different interfaces depending on what culture she would interact with. And then basically
because I want to ask you about this, Julian. What do you say then? Because for me right now, it feels like humanity has access to another layer of the Akashic library, for want of a better way of saying it. It's like all this new information coming through, questioning our history, questioning who we are, questioning our creator, how we're made. And one of the theories is that these deities were actually real beings from another planet that lived here on Earth with us, and that the drama of the stories was stuff that actually happened here. What would you say to that?
Oh, that's a very challenging one. I actually have memory of some of that. If we speak about the Sumerian stories, for example.
Yes, yeah, I don't know enough about it. This is what I'm looking into, but
yeah, all right. So you got to get some first-hand accounts here. All right. So we need to be very clear on the matter that there are actually deities, but there were also plenty of beings posing as such and taking advantage and exploiting early humanity. So I have very straightforward experience of people know them as the Anunnaki, but they actually pronounce Anunnaki.
Okay.
The children of Anu. And I remember being in an alien body and basically coming down to Earth, invading Earth, and like the conquistadors, we took all the gold, we enslaved the people, and we basically made them worship us as God. It wasn't all as gods. It wasn't all black and white, I can tell you, because they also received a lot of teaching from us in terms of mathematics, in terms of agriculture, and so on. But it was a tremendously dysfunctional relationship, let's say it that way. And these are memories that are probably 50,000, 60,000 years old. So when you, for example, read the book of Enoch that has been removed from the Bible for very obvious reasons, there's a story about the angel Gabriel coming to Earth and basically performing a genocide. So what was that about? Gabriel at the time was an Anunnaki officer in the military. And what was happening is that the crew that they left behind started having sex with humans. And they started merging DNA. The Anunnaki leadership was very upset about that because they're like, oh, we don't want our DNA uncontrollably merging with the human DNA. And they basically said, okay, let's drop a nuclear weapon on those people. And I have memory of that. I remember standing aside of the river Tigris in Iraq and seeing the bodies float in the water from the nuclear blast. Yes. So humans have mixed spiritual experience, but also the traumatic experiences in contact with, let's say, early exposure to alien life forms. So, for example, in the Hindu mythology, you will see that a lot of the deities in depiction have blue skin. The Anunnaki had blue skin. So I had memory of how my skin looked. I had like, patterns of blue with a little bit of white in between. And I could see that very detailed. In fact, I remember how I was risen in the military there was utterly traumatic, I can tell you. If I speak about the details, it's pretty gruesome. Yes. So humans have mixed up different experiences that are actually in the collective unconscious, like those early alien encounters, like the Atlantean memories, for example. They are there in everybody and they're acting it out without even knowing that they're acting it out. And at the same time, they are profound spiritual experiences and they have merged the two. So it's a little bit convoluted.
Yes.
Yeah. Why there is a being that you could call Shiva, why there is a being that you could call, for example, Ganesh, and these beings are very, very real. They have nothing to do with those alien invaders. But the reason why the Hindus then said, okay, let's paint some of our deities blue, because it wasn't black and white. Because there were also those who were benevolent, who would go against the grain in their own society and say, well, I don't believe what the Anunnaki leadership is doing, and I'm going to teach the humans our secrets. Yeah. So if we want to decode all of that,
isn't there? There's a lot in it. There's a lot in it.
There's a lot in it. Yeah, sure.
But then we're all poured from the same champagne then. Because because I do remember things, but I think I live on a need to know basis, which is I don't want to know unless I need to know. So I've held a lot of things back from myself, about myself, because I feel it's a distraction from why I'm here. But I think the reason that we're here, if we pour down from that divine champagne into these human bodies now, we're here for a reason. I have to stop questioning it. I trust my higher self and that we're in the right place at the right time and following from our heart to do what we feel is the right thing to do. That's we can't do any more than that.
Well, and in a way, if you have a musical symphony and this musical symphony has themes that are aligned harmoniously, every human being is a part of the puzzle and is supposed to embody a little bit of the truth. So as the totality of humanity, we have 360 degrees of truth. So therefore, the way spirit will guide you will be different than spirit will guide me, because we're supposed to embody certain aspects of the truth. There is no way a human can embody the totality of this experience. For that, we have to actually leave the body in spiritual practice to see it from the higher dimensions. But while you're here, it would be a little bit overwhelming for the nervous system when you suddenly remember, well, 2000 years ago, I actually accidentally swiped a butterfly in the same spot that I'm standing right now.
Yeah, it's too much to hold. I would say to people, like, the first Macintosh computer was like a little cube, and you turn it on and go and make a cup of tea, and you come back and it's still not on. And I said, now you try and make a full-length animated movie on that little cube, and that's you trying to fit the entirety of who we are and why we're here into this little brain. We just can't do it. So.
Right. And this is exactly why, like in this revelation process, and well, the Bible is very distorted and convoluted, but there are some statements in there that I find quite true. Especially the statement, what is hidden shall be revealed. And we are in that time that what is hidden shall be revealed, where the amnesia of humanity is undone. And that means history that is ancient, mystical practices that most of humanity has forgotten. Many people were beginning remembering their past lives. So there are many aspects now that come together so we can integrate them and then come into fusion. And when you say, well, there's a reason that we're here, in a practical way, from a yogic perspective, when we do certain exercises where we start breathing in divine material, we bring that divine material to earth. So we are basically the portals that are summoning that divine material, and then we radiate it. And through the radiation of it, this dimension is uplifted.
Yes.
But what we're breathing in, and this might sound quite abstract for some people, is God. So we're breathing in more of God. This is what the yogi does. And there's a certain type of angelic breath, in the form of Kriya Yoga that Yogananda was teaching, that we're also practicing here, where we basically breathe in angelic energy, and it begins changing our nervous system. It crystallizes it. It opens up frequency of experiences that are multidimensional, that previously weren't accessible. So we begin understanding we're basically traveling up this pyramid of champagne. And the higher you are on the pyramid, the more you are aware of everything else.
Yes.
So as an idea, when we increase in frequency, and let's say that your past lives are actually not past lives, they're parallel lives, they're coexisting. So when you suddenly go into a meta dimension and you get in touch with your oversoul, now from your oversoul's perspective, you are aware of all your lifetimes at the same time. So it can happen, you sit in meditation, you suddenly embody a past you or a future you, and you sense it merging with you. And this is what actually happens on the level of energy. On the level of energy, we can merge with anything. A very gifted yogi can sit and pray to Hanuman, and suddenly Hanuman, the deity, is merging the energy field with the yogi. For most people, they don't see it. It's invisible to them because it's not open to the frequency band. Yes. But when you realize, oh, these champagne glasses, you can actually shift them into each other.
Yes.
Then it's not a question of what are you, it's more a question of what are you not. If I can experience a deity as part of my own psychology, in the same way I could remember childhood memory, then there is no borders.
I know. That's fascinating to see it ripple outwards in the world now. I went to meet a client for a coffee. I hadn't seen him in a while, and I was in a state of meditative state, and I walked from my office to see him in a church, and all the dogs that were there started barking as I walked past, and I didn't even hear them, and he will never let me forget it. But that's a recognition when you're in a different frequency, that the dogs look at me funny sometimes, or cats, because they can see the energy.
Yes, they do.
I think there's more and more of us who are able to do that, and it's such a gift, and it makes life that much richer. I think I had many lifetimes as a monk living on my own. I decided I wanted to be a spiritual mystical being with a family this time, and see could I do it. So.
That's exciting. Well, in fact, you had a life in Tibet.
I'm sure I did.
Oh, yes.
I remember I watched a documentary about them in Tibet, and they had satellite dishes and they had Facebook, and I got so angry. What are you doing?
Oh, but then I have a little bit of a counter argument towards that. In the same way you choose to have children by saying, I want to make that experiment. You see, I'm a yogi with Facebook. Yeah. And why do I have Facebook? It's not obviously not because I agree with this control matrix that tries to censor us and enslave us. Again, it's just a catalyst provided for us. Yeah, we can use that for ascension. You don't have
Well,
to
my friend
put
always
us
says
down.
use their weapons against them. That's what he
Well, that's
says.
exactly what we're doing. We're using the social media to flood it with spiritual content, which of course is transforming the matrix from inside out, that we have to deal with, sometimes being targeted, as you have experienced, as I have experienced, that the system, for example, gives us strikes on our YouTube channels because we say something that the system doesn't approve of. This is just a medal of recommendation. In fact, when I got the strike on my YouTube channel, I was basically yelling out of
Badge of
joy.
honor.
Finally,
Badge of honor. There you go.
badge of honor, exactly. Because
It's
I was
great
like, well, if
talking
they're
to you like
targeting
this.
you, huh?
Talking to you like this on one-to-one, if I feel like we're connected more now. It's really good. It's like, oh, there's my brother Julian. Finally connect
Yeah.
again. Which is good.
And that's very, very true. I have often situations, I meet people, like I shake their hands and I see how I met them in other lifetimes, and it's a bit overwhelming. Um, I remember, for example, I was in Italy and I met a friend. He had a mansion in Tuscany, very beautiful, and there was a lady visiting, and this lady took a certain, very, very popular injection and wanted to have an energy healing. No, actually, she didn't take that injection. Her boyfriend did, and she actually got contaminated through sexual interaction. And I saw
Okay.
that energetically, how the nanoparticles were like spreading through the lower energy centers. And so, okay. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do an energy healing. And I sit down with her and I summon the deity Kali to assist me in purging that energy. But what I'm seeing is she's sitting in front of me, and suddenly I see a Buddhist nun in Tibet overlapping with her. And I'm like, oh, that's how I know you. And interestingly, for some reason, I wanted to teach her Tantra. And I didn't know exactly where this came from, but it's very important for people in the West to understand Tantra is not slow sex with your partner, all right? It is not to maximize the orgasm. No, Tantra is to move the sexual energy into higher dimensions so we fuse with God, so we attain unity with God. It's not for pleasure, it's not for enhancing orgasm. So the reason I wanted to teach her Tantra, which I found out later, actually she opposed that. She got quite angry with me. And I got also upset, and I suddenly feel a wall coming up in me and a wall coming up in her. We both were very puzzled. Why are we suddenly so hardened? And I was like, okay, let me investigate that. I want to know. So next day I meditate and I actually see myself as a lama in Tibet, and she was a nun, and she fell in love with some man, and she wanted to give up being a nun. And I said to her, no, come on, I'm going to teach you Tantra, and you can completely transmute the sexual energy, so you don't have to engage in that, and you can stay on the higher path. You don't have to, let's say, choose a lower possibility. And I don't mean this in a judgmental way. I'm speaking of it in terms of physics and energy. So we had the same conversation again, probably hundreds of years later, and got equally upset and appalled. Right? So when we experience each other from that dimension of truth, it's very hard not to love everybody.
Yeah.
Because most beings that you meet, you have already met many, many times. Yeah, when you have a feeling of deja vu, when you have the feeling, oh, I resonate with that particular being, you feel an attraction in some way. being magnetized. And it is simply that everyone is truly God. They just have amnesia, and we're playing with each other through all these different roles. It's just when we don't remember, it's so easily to get caught up in this frame.
Yeah, and I think more and more people now are recognizing this quicker and having conversations with people faster and are less afraid to say things such as this to clear it and either continue in relationship with them or not. But I think it speeds up the process of a rise in frequency of the collective. From, you know, it's as if we've signed up to meet the most important people in all of our lifetimes, and many of us are meeting more of them in this lifetime than in any other lifetime, if that makes any sense. So,
it does, because
all the gang is here.
Yeah, especially it is connected with a certain popular injection, because with regards to the idea of soul harvest or soul graduation, every soul had to make certain choices, choose a higher reality, choose a lower reality in terms of energy, again, not in terms of judgment. We don't judge. But when we started moving into the higher energy, and actually when we had a satsang on a Saturday with like a big group of people, I asked everybody, have you actually noticed that time is speeding up? And everybody was like nodding. They're like, so I said, in the past, you maybe had one major life event within 4 years. And suddenly you have like 10 major life events within a year. So suddenly the energy increase led to a speeding up in time and to an incoming of the multidimensional perception. And everybody feels like this tremendous pressure to evolve, because there's so much catalyst being offered to the higher energy. And then, of course, when light comes in, the thing that is illuminated is the darkness. It's the first thing that we become aware of when we're being hit by light. So when you said something in the beginning about a certain so-called medical doctor promoting a certain so-called very popular injection, that if he would have to face God, he would burn up in the fire. Well, what would burn up would be the dark matter, the dark energy. And this is exactly why people are afraid to ascend and are afraid to step into the light, because they would feel everything that they had ever done when they step into God. Well, to a yogi, it's a non-issue, because we are on fire every time we sit. We are
but then this also connects to our discussion about psychology and psychotherapy, that we've, you know, the model for that doesn't fit the escalation and the, what's the word? I've lost the word now. No, that we've gone
acceleration,
so much
maybe
acceleration of our growth process, whereas the talking is heavy and slow, and we're not heavy and slow so much anymore. So I met a friend recently who I hadn't seen in several years, because we had one of those events where all the light came in, it was too much, and she ran away. You know, so she's come back now several years later, and we're very gentle with each other and taking it very carefully. But she said she had another time where she was alone in a forest and all this light came through. She saw all of her darkness, and she was able to work through it and clear it from her system instead of letting it crush her. And she's here to tell the tale. And I don't think that type of an event could be something supported by psychotherapy necessarily. And more people are going through events like that, where out of nowhere, all this light comes through. And it's, you know, because the more light that people are bringing in, as you had mentioned, we're bringing in God through the breath, we're emanating it, we're transmitting it. People are hit by that. And there's no logical mind, you know, based scenario that fits. And then when they clear out with, like, to get the big sweeping brush and just clear out all the dust and debris and trauma, and here you are now, it's gone. And your brain keeps telling you the story of your trauma. You get stuck in that, you're not going to grow. Whereas psychology doesn't know how to end. I mean, I would get people coming to me to say, I've been seeing a psychotherapist for 12 years and I want to stop. I need you to help me stop, you know, because it's the dependency. that
Yes.
you feel the need that you have to be doing this all the time, where there's always something I have to fix. This is our society. Whereas what if you're perfect right now as you are? What if you don't have to fix anything? Can you just be
This
sitting on
is
the mountain
powerful
and
what you're
just
saying.
breathing?
This is
Yeah, but
very powerful right now. And this is also so tricky, even in like Buddhist teaching and Buddhist practice. Like if we try to get, for example, someone into ego death, if we want them to experience samadhi, we first need to teach them not to resist the ego, not try to fix the ego, not to repair the ego, because fixing and repairing is the ego.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's basic. But the ego isn't real. It's just a phenomenon of energy patterns and conditions that are moving, and you're watching it. Like it's not real. It has no identity of its own. It just, when we identify with it, it seems to have an identity. It seems to be a separate self. So, but it's like watching a movie and calling the movie I.
Yeah.
No, I'm just watching a movie. I'm just watching conditions. But what you're saying is very, very important and powerful here. So we can not fix or repair. Like I don't offer that as an idea, but I offer the idea of transformation. I offer the idea of evolution, and I offer the idea of expansion. But before we start expanding and evolving and transforming and ascending, we need to accept where we are. If we cannot accept where we are, we're hostile towards our experience. So we keep disturbing our nervous system. So how can we fine tune it to the divine? So the constant needing for self-improvement is the belief in lack, is the
Yes.
belief in imperfection, is the belief that you're flawed to begin with. And that is the traumatic experience. That is what came out of the trauma. The self-attack. And then like what you said is important with regards to when someone said, oh, I'm going for 12 years to a psychotherapist, when the psychotherapy can't be very effective. It takes you 12 years. I'm sorry. That's not effective. Yeah.
No.
And I remember I had a client, a female who was like a CEO in a big company. So she had a lot of money. And she would constantly use money to fix problems. Like pay off her family. Often she came too late to my appointments or didn't came at all. And she would keep paying me. And then at some point where she actually showed up, I asked her if she has practiced anything let's say, that I offered her to practice. Did she practice mindfulness? Did she meditate? Did she reassociate with her body instead of disassociating? And the only thing that got out of her is still keep using drugs, using money to solve our problems. And then the proper form of therapy was to not serve her anymore. Because I
Yes.
realized if she would keep coming to me and I will allow her to drop the negative energies, she would be compensating and I would stabilize her dysfunctional system. Because every time she would be under pressure, she would come to me and complain, but then not change her behavior. So I was like, okay,
Exactly.
you got to find another therapist, because if you're not doing the exercises that I'm giving you, you're not improving. And then I become part of the problem, because now I'm supporting your dysfunctional ego. Not going to do that. And I could have said, well, the woman has money. She comes in, she pays me. Even if she doesn't come in, I could have taken that money. And at the time, I didn't have much money. I can tell you that. But I was like, this is not ethically right. Yeah. I cannot be part of the compensation that she's using to not face herself. So I said, I'm
Exactly.
not going to treat you any longer. Find another therapist.
And was she okay with that?
Of course not.
She offered to pay you
But
twice as much.
interesting, later she found another therapist, and she actually wrote me a big email where she thanked me that she now realized why I did this.
But
Yeah.
she's still with the other guy.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter that she continued the pattern, which of course I don't know, because from that moment on it's
Yeah, so
confidential.
you're not her. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you,
So that's part of the letting go, isn't it? That's part of the allowing other people, they're all on their own journey, you know, and for whatever reason that they do. I remember actually one of my friends read my novel and said, but what happened to that client? He just disappeared. And I said, yeah, so this is the life of the therapist. You never know what happens to your clients. You know,
Yes.
and you can't be attached to it. You can't attach to the story of them. You have to let people go and be who they are and just be the best version of yourself.
You also can't serve them if you attach, because any sort of attachment has an element of fear and has an element of resisting change. And if we attach to people, well, then we believe in the conditions of the world and we're not channeling our heart. And sometimes, as I often say to people, true teaching is tremendously offensive. It needs to be. Yeah, but of course, the capacity to be offended is the level of ego that someone is experiencing. I
And you just
remember.
used that word, Julian, offended, which is like the one that they're weaponizing at the moment.
Oh yes.
But being offended is a teaching tool. Being, you know, if you're offended, you have to sit with that and ask yourself why you're offended. And then you have to own it. You claim responsibility for it and you shift something about yourself or don't. It's not up to me to make you feel better.
Well,
You know,
let's be straightforward. If we speak about identity politics, if I translate it, it's ego politics.
yeah,
It's offering people a victim identity so they don't have to be a sovereign in their own reality. So you can
exactly.
externalize the reason why you're suffering instead of owning up. And for the majority of people, like in general, when I do trauma work, I have not met a single person that believes to be a victim that hasn't been also a predator. So when we're in the victim energy, we are in the predatorial energy.
Yes, okay.
Right? So because those who believe that they are victims, they believe to be at a disadvantage. Now, when you believe you're at a disadvantage, you got to get an advantage over those who have an advantage over you. And that means manipulation, obsession with power, suppressing people. So the very belief in victimhood is a belief in lack, especially lack of energy. So now I'm like, oh, I believe I'm in a state of lack of energy. Now I need to get energy. Others seem to have more energy than I do. How do I get the energy from them? Now I turn from victim into predator. And this is what the whole leftist movement is about, is avoiding shadow work, is avoiding to get in touch with one's own karma, and externalizing the reason for suffering by
Yes.
projecting the shadow outward and saying, well, outside is what I hate, and I need to defeat it and dominate it, because they will not be fine with equality. They will be, why do they speak about privilege so much? Because this is what they want. Yeah?
Yeah.
So they believe others have privilege, and now they want to steal it from them. And they don't even know that they're weaponized by very dark entities who want to use communist ideology. And now let's be very clear about that. What is communist ideology? We saw what happened in the Cultural Revolution in China. It was a complete destroying of spiritual memory. They cut off the head of Buddhas. They destroyed the ancient history. And this is exactly what happened in the US when they start tearing down the statues of the founding fathers. The first thing that communism does is kill the memory of a society so it can put its own oppressive system in place. And they don't even understand, those young people, that their own pain is being weaponized. They don't understand it. They just think that those people in power are their allies and are trying to support them in their quest for freedom. No, they're being weaponized. That's what's going on.
Wow. So all the more important then for us to continue to do our spiritual work,
Oh,
I
yes.
think. Absolutely is.
Oh, yes.
Wow.
So with regards to this weaponization, there was a time where I was supposed to tell a dear friend of mine something very, very difficult. And I hesitated with that because a part of me was attached to that relationship. And I remember meditating outside, and I'm not 100% sure if if at the time I was reading the Bhagavad Gita. But what happened is I saw a manifestation of Krishna. And in the Bhagavad Gita, for those who don't know, there's the story where Krishna basically speaks to the prince Arjuna, who is about to go to battle against his own family, who has indulged demonic energies in the kingdom. And he says, I don't want to kill my own family. I feel morally very bad about this. Like my conscience is heavy. And then basically Krishna says to him, don't grieve the forms, they are unreal. But if you don't go to battle, the message that you send through the whole kingdom is that demonic forces are allowed in your kingdom, and corruption is fine. So your karma is to go to battle today. And when Krishna appeared to me, he said, have no mercy towards the illusions of your friends. Shoot them like Arjuna shot his brothers on the battlefield. So what does that mean? It's a different understanding of compassion. If we are insincere with people, we prolong their stay in samsara. We are prolonging their stay in suffering.
Yes.
But if we're honest, on the human level, on the subjective level, on our local psychology level, we need to deal with a lot of rejection and verbal attack and psychic attack and so on. But if we don't do it, we're not speaking from the heart, we're not speaking from the core of course, we're not speaking from God. And there's no alternative.
Against everything that we are if we don't speak.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the challenge for the mystical practitioner at this time, is to stay true no matter the outside consequences.
I think it's great that we're able to talk about this like this. I think we've covered a huge amount. And I'm really sorry, Julian, but I'm going to have to go.
it's all good.
I'm really loving this. We have to do it again.
Sure. Why not? I'm up for it. I wanted to wrap it up either way. But to wrap it up, is there anything that you want to share with the people who are going to listen? And also, you please feel free to promote your work. If you have a website, please let us know about the website, or if you have any titles of books that you have written right now that you recommend.
I'll show you my books.
All right.
You're going to laugh at the title. So this is the first one.
Oh,
Awakening. And this is the second one. This Transformation. And this is the third one. Expansion.
Oh, I see a logical and chronological theme here.
And so I had to send this one back because I wanted the portal on the spine of the paperback.
Yeah.
But this is the process. You know,
yes.
I'm not going to write another one called Embodiment and then another one and another one. But this, for me to bring someone on the journey, it's more experiential than this is what to expect, or this is to talk about what the process is like, to experience it through the eyes of a character. And I've written them like a thriller, so they do look big, but they move very quickly. There's a lot in it. So if anybody's interested in these, you know, they're available online. You could, you know, and all the usual bookstores. And my website is abby-wynne.com, and everything I do is on there. But, you know, we need to keep these conversations going. We need to be able to talk about what's going on. And I think the way we've articulated it just now has really made a lot more sense to me. I have more to work with now. And maybe anyone who's listened who has not been strong enough to speak out, start speaking out. Yeah, because we need many voices, and say it in your own way and be strong about it, and don't be afraid to call things out. When you see people who are in a delusion, you know, they're in a delusion. There's no two bones about it. And to not be nice and leave them be, because that's not the way, because, you know, I've got children and it's not the kind of world I want my children to grow up in. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for having me on. And I really look forward to doing this again.
All right. Thank you for co-creating with me, Abby. Yeah, it has been very joyful. I'm glad that we had a lot of laughter during this episode here. Now,
can I get you to share with me, because I'd like to share this with my people too. Where can people find
absolutely.
you, and what are you working on at the moment?
Well, my website is www.julian-polzin.de. And what I'm currently doing, I am in Peru because we're looking here for land to build a monastery where we will teach a very broad, integrative Buddhist Hindu yogic system. Well, that will lead to realization. We're not going halfway. Halfway is not the way. It's not a way at all. And we are here to preserve the mystical knowledge. My karma is very clear here. I'm supposed to be a teacher of teachers and help the next generation to spread the old mystical knowledge from the Atlantean origin to Buddhism, to Hinduism, to Tibetan Buddhism, and so on and so on. There are years of evolution that goes into that. And we're trying to do something new. And even someone as me who has a lot of, let's say, if I want to make fun of it, old school memory, and is in some ways a little bit stiff in his old school approach. We are now learning in a way to do mystical practice more involved with the world. Yeah, instead of being in full renunciation, instead of being in full monk mode, it is such an integrative time where we need to address the multidimensionality and find new ways of staying on the path, but at the same time acknowledging that we live in new times. So it's very exciting. There's a lot of creativity involved here.
I love that. That is fabulous, and that's what's needed, because we need to bring this into our homes and be able to live with our neighbors and still be connected to God and have these mystical experiences as part of who we are.
Yes.
Definitely.
And not to extend too long, because I know I gotta let you go, but it's about doing the splits. Yeah, this is what I joke about a lot. Yeah, can you? I ask my students sometimes, if you think you're ready for certain experience, can you sit in meditation and have a conversation with Jesus, and next morning make yourself a coffee? Well, if you can, welcome. You are an advanced practitioner.
Having 2 feet and 1 foot in each world. But it's always go back to Ram Dass for me. You think you're enlightened, go and spend a week with your family. So that's really bringing it home. Thank you very much.
All right. You're welcome, Abby. And again, thank you for co-creation. Yeah.